You're watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next hour, we're going to be talking about the state of Doctor Who, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR,
Hi, I'm Dylan.
And I'm John.
and so here's the inside baseball. I've got an ear infection, so I'm deaf in one ear. So if I'm a bit shouty or can't hear what these two are saying, would you really notice a
Yeah,
difference?
you're always a bit shouty.
No,
You do the
I can't,
talking, we just nod.
and I can't
which makes
do
for a great podcast.
I can't do video calls without shouting because I'm just like, they're not in the same room. Right. There's a lot to get through, and Dylan is on limited time, so we've only
I'm
got
not
him for an
dying.
hour. Dylan only has limited time. Now that doesn't make it sound
JR's
any.
only got so much budget for him, and his rates are
Yeah,
through the roof.
yeah.
Yeah,
I'm on
absolutely.
that Disney money.
Yeah, right. We came in we were going to have a conversation just about where does Doctor Who sit in the streaming versus broadcasting universe anyway. And actually, given where Doctor Who stands at the moment, it makes sense to sort of tie this in with the news, the rumours, the speculation, whatever that's going around at the minute. To be honest, as regards rumours, speculation, leaks, news, all the rest of it, I refer you back to our Billy Piper podcast from Tuesday because actually the leaks and stuff have pretty much corroborated almost everything we said in one way or another, although a little bit of clarity around some areas. But I sort of think we should probably start there and open the conversation out as we go. So the whole thing will probably be about the situation as it stands, but a lot of the conversation will be in slightly looser terms because what we're basically talking about is Schrodinger's Doctor Who, isn't it? And I think the point that a lot of people miss about the sort of Schrodinger's cat thing, a lot of people say, oh, the cat either exists or doesn't exist. No, it's not about whether the cat exists or doesn't exist. The cat is either there or it isn't. But you don't know whether it's there or not until you open the box. And I think that's where we sit with Doctor Who. It's either going to carry on or it isn't. And for my money, it's going to carry on, right? So it's more a case of when rather than if. But the point is, we don't know. We don't know what the situation is. So it's a bit of a Schrodinger's situation because obviously things are going on behind the scenes. We just don't know what they are. And I think the bottom line of this entire situation is Disney, clarity from Disney about whether they want to continue or not. We're all assuming that they don't want to. Very likely they don't want to. They've had a change at the head of the organization since the contract was signed, and Bob Iger, for all that we can tell, has got no interest in carrying on doing Doctor Who at all. But the BBC can't talk to other broadcasters, other streamers, other, whatever, until they get a definite yes or no from Disney. I mean, probably they'd be breaking certain trade laws if they did. They can presumably have general conversations, but they can't go into negotiations with somebody else while they're still under contract with Disney. I don't know, Dylan, you work in telly, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And everybody's talking about the end of series two, but what about the end of presumably the contract comes to an end at the end of the war between the land and the sea, and there may
Yes.
be a cooling off period. There may be a Disney have got X amount of time to decide whether they want to do it. So it's all very well us assuming after series two, because that is what Russell said. But they could quite easily string this out until after that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and even if they've made up their mind and said we don't want to do it, there still could be a cooling off period of like a year or something where they're not allowed to engage with other people.
Absolutely. My assumption is they probably wouldn't have much of a cooling off period because the way telly works these days is you've got to hop into bed with lots of different people. And the BBC have done it before. But that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't one. They've gone into bed in a different way with Disney. So the terms of the contract could be different with Disney to what they've had before. So we don't know. And given what Russell said, I'd assume that somebody at Disney has sort of tipped the wink at him that they'll give him a decision before War Between the Land and the Sea rather than after. But again, that's in their hands. They don't have to do that. And so whatever happens, the plan that the BBC will want to go ahead with, they can't start working on that until they get a definite answer from Disney. And so the next series of Doctor Who, they might not have a decision for Disney for another 18 months. They might not be able to start talking to anybody else for another 12 months. Negotiations with other broadcasters, because this is not an easy thing to negotiate, especially given that the BBC have put all their eggs into one basket. So all the other contracts they had have finished in order for that to happen. Any other negotiations they have aren't going to be easy. That could be another 18 months. And then Doctor Who goes into production for a year and there's post production for a year. It could be that we get Doctor Who in 2027. It could be 5 years. I mean, Dylan, again, your opinion on that?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's important that to sort of look at the structure of the deals. So there is with Disney, BBC were investing X amount of money, Disney were investing probably a lot more. That's just the way these things go. And the way a normal BBC budget is structured is the BBC will go, we're putting in X amount of money per episode. I did something recently for a much smaller thing for the BBC. It was 6 episodes. They were putting in 500,000. The cost of each episode was 1.5 million. The rest of that money comes from a tax credit and from pre-sales across the world. Now,
Oh,
what
yes.
and what the BBC do is get a loan against the pre-sales and the tax credit, and then it all, comes out in the wash, and they make their money back. The problem you have, and that's how Doctor Who have been funded for the last
10 or
18.
15
Yeah,
years.
exactly. The problem is, reportedly, again, if you believe certain rumors, certain not, that all the people that used to fund do that, A, have got less money because there's less money going around in the industry. B, were the people that were hard done by the Disney deal ultimately. So you've got to restart those negotiations, and knowing that you as the makers of the program are on the back foot.
And the thing about Doctor Who is it's popular. It's always made its money back. And
Mm,
so they will get deals. They may not get as good a deal as they've had with Disney. They may not get as good deals as they had before necessarily, at least in the short term. I mean, in the longer term, the BBC will want to continue making Doctor Who because at the moment it is by far and away their highest profile scripted programming with longevity and a
yeah.
back catalogue and stuff like that. I mean, they might have certain things that come along and they're higher profile for a series or a couple of series, but Doctor Who's been high profile for 20 years. They've got nothing like that in their scripted department, frankly. And so they'll want to keep doing it because it not just brings in money, it brings in attention and it brings attention to their other programming and just to them as a broadcaster. And
Mm.
given what's sort of going on potentially with the license fee in the next few years, the BBC will want to hold on to and continue making their higher profile programming when it comes. But so there's several other factors in play, isn't it? And the fact that we've had insane inflation for the last few years has not helped in any way. And the fact that programming is much more expensive to make anyway. And across the last few years, you've also had COVID, which has added costs.
Since COVID, making television and films, the costs have gone up 30 to 40% across the board. And
Well, this
budgets
is
budgets are now going down because streamers don't have any money and terrestrial channels don't have any money because advertising's gone down because less people are watching terrestrial television.
for
So
sure.
it's a pretty sorry state of affairs in terms of in terms of the amount of programming and the cost of programming that's been made. It's there is less being made, and there will continue to be less being made, and it's whether they can make the programs they want to make at that price point.
And well, then with the BBC, of course, the thing you've got to remember as well is the license fee's been locked for decade or
Mm.
more now, and it's not going up by any sort of particular amount. And it pays for all sorts of other things as well, which are all becoming more expensive too.
Mm.
We forget the infrastructure that the license fee pays for, but it does, and that's not getting any cheaper. I was going to give this stupid example, not stupid, but simplified example. If the BBC have got £1 million for 6 programs, and 5 of those programs cost 100 grand each, and the other one costs 500,000, and then the cost of everything doubles, but the BBC still have 1 million. What do? Do they put their entire million into the one program, Or do they ditch that one program for the time being and have the other five programs instead, which are
Mm,
now costing 200 grand each? That answers itself, doesn't it?
yeah.
Because you've got five times as much
News
programming.
24. There you go. There's my
And yeah,
I know it's more complex.
But no. It all adds up at a certain point, especially now we talk in terms of content rather than programs. But News 24 is a ongoing stream of content that is reasonably cheap to make
Mm.
compared to their high-end dramas. There's a reason you don't have a soap opera on 24 hours a day because it's
Yeah.
too expensive to do it. But the news is a constant source of that. I think what's interesting about Doctor Who is you said like it will continue, but it can also bubble away in the background for half a decade quite easily and still make them lots and lots of money in other ways.
Back
Um,
catalogue, YouTube, etc., etc.
exactly. That doesn't mean that it's not. We're not talking the 90s. We're not
No.
talking 15 years. But I'm sure they would be quite happy to have it on the back burner and continue to make money from it while they figure out what the next stage looks like.
Well, just on that point of the 1990s, this thought came into my head, and I think I need to sort of say this because people will be worried about how long it might take. And they'll be thinking, is this the 1990s all over again? Because Doctor Who was cancelled in 1985. But then there was a very quick campaign, and they very quickly reversed the decision to cancel it. But because they'd cancelled it, Doctor Who goes back by, well, 18 months, a year, because
6 months.
yeah. But
Mm.
in the cancelling of it, you've shoved it down the road by way longer than it took to reverse the decision, because everything stops and everything has to pick up again, and you move into the next financial year and so on. In 1989, the BBC didn't want to cancel Doctor Who. They wanted to find somebody else to make it
Yeah.
for them, and they spent half a decade finding somebody else to make it for them.
It wasn't even that though. It was the
Oh,
fact.
but just to finish my point,
Mm,
and my point is this: the BBC already have Bad Wolf, so they're not going to spend half a decade looking
mm,
for Bad
mm,
Wolf.
mm.
That's the situation is not the same as it was in 1990, is
Wh-
what I'm saying.
When they took it off air in '89, they expected it to be back on television by 1991 at the latest. What
Yeah,
happens is Philip Siegel happens and he promises Steven Spielberg. So when people like Verity Lambert and loads of independent production companies are bidding for the show, all making interesting bids, what they actually do is go, oh no, we're going to wait for Steven Spielberg because you would. And that ultimately took 7 years and ended up as a straight to TV movie.
yeah.
I
Which
did,
Steven Spielberg had no involvement
yeah,
with in the end.
had the people involved known, that wouldn't have happened. And by 1991, you would have had it back on British television in a Saturday night slot. I'm 99.9% sure of it.
And the other massive difference between now and then is because of the cost of television. Back then, the BBC could make programming, and they kind of knew that they would sell it abroad. And we know, we've heard the stories that in the 80s they were selling Doctor Who abroad for more than it was costing them to make it, right?
Mm.
I don't know whether that's strictly true, but it must be nearly true. So the BBC kind of knew that they would make the money, but they didn't get the money invested in the front end. They got the money back at the back end. So the BBC, at that point, it was cheap enough that they could afford to make it, and then the selling it afterwards was kind of an afterthought, and that money
It was
went into other.
made for an impossibly low amount according to the BBC's budget. You need to amortize it across 20 episodes, and they only have
Yeah.
14. And again, another difference. Back
Oh, I
then you
didn't
had
finish
the
my point,
executives
John.
oh yeah, the executives at the top of the BBC. They didn't. They were quite happy to not make Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Peter Green, etc. Nowadays, you do have people who would like to see Doctor Who on the air. Piers
Oh, yes.
Wenger actively went, I want Russell T Davies back, and went and got him. So there is a self-interest there in getting Doctor Who made and on the air.
But the point I was making is that back then the BBC would quite happily make Doctor Who and sell it afterwards. These days it's so expensive they can't afford to just make it. Going back to what I said about the million versus the sort of the 500,000 versus the 5 times 100,000. If Doctor Who is that expensive to make in the first place, they can't take the risk and they can't afford to put the money in the front end themselves. They need investors to be putting money in at the front end rather than just hoping to pick it up at the back end. So they can't make Doctor Who until they've got outside investors getting involved, from foreign territories. So if the Disney deal does go south, as we all expect it to, the BBC are not going to start making Doctor Who until they can guarantee some of that money back. Because as those loans that Dylan was talking about, and there's an expression, and I can't remember what the expression is, and we've actually talked about it before, but the banks, that whoever it is that you're getting the loan from is not going to loan you the money if they don't know that they're getting the money back at the back end. You've got to guarantee them that you're selling this program. And so companies like Bad Wolf will, in order to make programs like His Dark Materials or whatever, they'll be able to go to money lenders and say, right, we've got a deal with X, Y, and Z companies in X, Y, and Z territories, and they have all written contracts to say that once this program is finished, they will pay us X amount of money for it. And then the bank can then look at that and say, right, that money is coming back. We'll lend you the money to make the program. And then when you got the money off them at the back end, you can pay it back to us. You don't get that if those contracts aren't written in ink.
Yeah, absolutely. And all those things take time. Otherwise we could all borrow 5 million quid or 200 million quid to make a TV show, and it'd be that easy, but it's not.
No, exactly. Before we get into a more general conversation about sort of the difference between streaming and broadcast and how Doctor Who sits across that sort of divide, because there are two different things going on there. They're two different mindsets and they're two different sort of financial structures. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But we did have, so this Andrew guy on Reddit who leaked about Billy Piper after we'd already podcasted about it, and who leaked about Shooter Gatwa leaving after we'd already podcasted about it. But he got those things right, and he didn't get them from us because we didn't have enough viewers or listeners. So these were leaks that just happened to be things that we'd already heard before. He leaked again this week with the situation as it was told to him. I'm going to read the whole thing out, and I think we should go through it sentence by sentence because I think there are a couple of things at play, and one is the context of the statements. In other words, what is the situation and how does the statement reflect the actual situation? And then the other thing is there's a bit of confirmation bias too, whether you like it or not. If somebody tells you something, your understanding of that thing, your reading of that thing will be informed by what you thought the situation was. So I think there's a bit of imprecise language in the statement that he's put out that means that certain people have seen this statement and have read it slightly the wrong way, perhaps. So we'll go through it and we'll just try and clarify it with the situation as we pretty much know it has to be. So it's about the Billy Piper thing, obviously, but we've kind of spoken about that, and I'll just go through it. He says, yes, casting Billy was a very last minute decision. We said, didn't we, that Russell T Davies probably made the phone call within the last few weeks. Around the time the Robot Revolution was airing, they were still planning to go with the cliffhanger regeneration. Being a cliffhanger to black, I guess he means. He says, but I don't think the casting of 16, Billy Piper, indicates or confirms the renewal for season 3 with 16 in it. In other words, I think people have read that and think, oh, that means maybe there's not a season 3, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. We said on the podcast that we thought Billy Piper was maybe there for a special to sit between season 2 and season 3 while Russell T Davies and the BBC get all their things in order to make season 3. So they could just do a special pretty quickly to get it out, to tide things over. And I think that's basically what he's saying too. He says, though, it seems more like stunt casting to round off RTD2 and kind of wrap up the New Who era by bringing it full circle. I don't think that's really the case at all. I think Bad Wolf, Russell T Davies and the BBC have got a plan for Series 3. Davies has talked about it plenty. It's not like Bad Wolf are going to kick Russell T Davies out and his plan and get somebody else in. I think, as I said before, I think the Billy Piper thing, it is stunt casting. In a way, it's very good casting, but it is stunt casting. But I think I think as soon as he makes that phone call, it's like, yeah, she's I'm come and do a special. He's like, yeah, I'll have you for a special, and then we can continue on afterwards. But again, like I just said, I think that needs to be a stopgap. I mean, that all sounds reasonable so far, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's made headlines as well. This is the other thing you've got to remember. Everybody's talking about it. People that I know who don't give a fuck are like, "Oh, Billy Piper." You
Yeah.
know, it's so it's some of those headlines have been quite negative. Some of the like reaction pieces in the press have been very positive. Like it gets people talking, and it gets people talking more than a dead end of a sort of fade to black, fade to white, whatever it
Oh
was
yeah.
going to be. And it says there is a future. Even if they don't know what it is, it says there's a future and there's something going forward, not this is the end.
And I said this on Tuesday or Monday or whatever it was when we recorded. I
Hmm.
don't think Russell T Davis. So, I mean, this will come up in this thing in a minute. I don't think Russell T Davis has got a kind of brain where he doesn't know what's. I think as soon as he makes that phone call to Billy Piper, the cogs start whirring.
Yeah.
And if even if he doesn't know what it's going to be when he makes the phone call, by the time she's there on set, I think he's probably got a pretty solid idea.
I also think the worst case scenario there is that he wanted to have a face at the end of it that they could put on official books in the
Yeah.
magazines, in the comic strip, things like that. So he can sort of go, oh well, this is your doctor that you can figure out. And then it's if it was 4 or 5 years, then he suddenly comes and it's still him and still them while they're figuring it all out. And we never see her again. That's one thing, or it's another lost
She's the
incarnation or
new
something.
McGann.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Like I think it's just to sort of make the brand continue regardless of
Yeah.
what format it's there in.
Well, this leak set, or this guy carries on. No, Billy wasn't even on set. She filmed everything with an incredibly small crew in front of a green screen in London a month or so ago, and they just pasted her face on to shoot his body. I mean, that's pretty obvious. He
Hmm.
says, I've heard, and I also suspected this myself, that Russell casting Billy was a way to increase audience interest, a bit like casting Tennant as 14, and hopefully then make the show more appealing to Disney. I don't think it was about that. I
No,
think Russell doesn't expect Disney to be interested. I think it's what Dylan said. I think it's about the brand and managing the next phase of Doctor Who by having
It's
something
about getting
positive.
it's about getting anyone interested. It's not just Disney.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely.
it has to be someone you've got a relationship with that you can sort of go, this is probably the plan, but we don't know, and who will do it for sort of a favor, but also be interested. So it just makes, but like you can't do it with Tom Cruise or something like that. It's
No.
you can't if you don't know the exact plan, even if you know the story. You've got to be pretty confident that you can get that person to come in at some point and follow it up, not will you be free in 18 months' time? Which is another reason why Gatwa left in the first place, because it's not necessarily that there's all sorts of rumors, things like that, but being attached to a show that you don't know what the future is for another 18 months is, a difficult decision for an actor whose career's on the up.
Yeah,
And it's the
absolutely.
peak of his career as well
Yeah.
at the
Yeah,
moment.
yeah. So, I mean, it would have been crazy. I don't think any actor would have stayed. I mean, for me, Shooty Gatwa now becomes the new Christopher Eccleston. I know it was two series rather than one, but it's the Doctor who comes in, something happens, doesn't quite go to plan, and he has to get out, and then you leave the door open for somebody else to come in and do it instead. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the plan itself changes. So the Eccleston into Tennant didn't change Russell T Davis's plan, especially. It changed the tone of it a bit, but the plan itself was probably pretty much,
Mm.
whether Eccleston had stayed or not. And I think whatever happens after Billy Piper, after a special or whatever, will probably be what Russell T Davis kind of had in mind anyway.
Yeah.
This Andrew guy carries on and he says the BBC are a bit concerned currently about how they're going to continue the show themselves. Lots of scrambling going on. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
that is not anything for us to worry about. This is just how television happens.
It also like all of that you were talking about information biased before, and we all sort of interpret these things in our own way. I,
Yeah,
I just want to just slightly sidetrack. The one of the people that told me that Gatwa was leaving, which came from somebody else, like, um, clearly the person, the initial source, was not a fan of Ncuti Gatwa. So
right.
what they said to me was, he did his regeneration. Then he just got in his car and went home. No big speeches, anything like that. This is true. But when you watch Unleashed, it's because it wasn't his last day, and on his last day, he does the big, he does
Yeah.
the big speech. It was just another day where he always gets in his car and goes home.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's sort of like,
Information bias. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That first person wanted to go because, yeah, I don't like Atwell, and so he's a dick. And but actually, like, we know he did all the things that were said there, but it's just, and so I don't know this Andrew. He may, he's clearly got some decent sources, but also it's his opinion, his source's opinion, things like that, that all sort of, and if it's from another fan, fans are largely always negative, aren't they?
And also, I think the context that I think he's fairly straightforward. I don't think he's too bad, but obviously there's a bit of sort of bias in it. But also, I think the thing that he's sort of missing is the underlying thing that I said right at the top, and I deliberately said it right at the top because I wanted that to be the primary message, that Doctor Who is not cancelled and it's not continuing either until they get a decision from Disney because they can't do anything until they get a decision from Disney. So until they get a decision from Disney, Doctor Who is still a continuing show that just isn't in production at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we as fans, the problem with Doctor Who is we put everything under a microscope. And fandom discusses it as a function of Doctor Who. I mean, the ratings are a big thing because they're just down in line with the rest of television.
Mm.
And as Dylan will be at pains to tell you, it's what we see as crisis on Doctor Who and all the gossip. It's just a function of making TV.
Yeah.
Making TV is chaos.
It is absolutely is every single day. But you guys aren't putting under the microscope your Christmas or mine too or whatever I'm working on at the time. So, but it's just as chaotic.
Although we will be doing that on a film club duet this December.
I've never seen it.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh, in that case, you might have to join us. We were going to do it behind your back.
There's an interesting, but so like I worked on something where we had to fire an actor 50% of the way through the shoot, and all sorts of discussions as to what we needed to do, how we did it. We cut them out. We had to reshoot a load of things. And if that happened on Doctor Who, it'd be chaos in Cardiff. And sure, it was chaos in, Wood Green or wherever it was that we were shooting. But it was just one of these things that you just had to get on with it. And it happens all the time. And it happens on every other show. And it's always chaos, and you have to deal with it because that's just, for some reason, that is what that industry is like.
Well, this is the big difference, isn't it? At your end, things like that happen. You just have to get on with it, and you have to massage the product around the decision that's been taken. A bit like the Reality War. I mean, I really enjoyed it, but you could tell, and actually I thought this made it more exciting and more interesting. You could tell that it was not the episode that had been planned like 2 years ago, and that certain decisions had altered that episode at a certain point beyond all recognition.
Absolutely.
I thought that made it really interesting actually to watch and added a level rather than took one away. But we see it completely differently from the people who are actually making it.
It'll make a stunning black archive one day, won't it, John?
Oh God, yes.
Oh, can I write that one?
I don't know if yeah, all right, if you want. I'll second you if you want.
I was down for a black archive. I had to give it up for a book that was commissioned and ultimately never published.
There we go.
Anyway, this Andrew carries on, and then we'll get into the sort of more general stuff because there's a fair bit more of this. But he says nothing is confirmed. I think Billy saw it more of a favour to Russell than anything. She's happy to do a special or series, but is also fine to just film a quick something in an attempt to help out the show, even if it ends up being of no use. Which I think suggests to me that unless somehow Russell T Davies gets ditched from Doctor Who, which I cannot in a million years see happening, then Billy Piper will come back and do probably just a special, maybe a sort of little mini series of 3 specials for him before he moves on with the next full-time Doctor, right?
I could see Russell being ditched. I don't think it would be an easy decision, or perhaps the decision that some people want. I think it would be if it was literally another partnership deal with someone like Amazon who said we don't want any of the previous creative team involved in this. But in terms of where we think it's going, which would probably be the same model as before, it'll be there for a while yet, I think.
In fact, actually, on that point, he has, I mean, I think he's pretty much intuited that the next series is all but ready to start shooting. But one thing he's very definitely said is the first episode of the next series is not written by him, but is written by a writing duo, a team of two people, which suggests to me possibly even already that he's thinking of moving upstairs and taking on a
Mm.
more oversight
He,
position
he
with.
said
Wasn't that the long-term planning?
Well, I don't know. This is the one that we talked about a lot because we kind of assumed it
Mm.
was, but nobody's ever said it is.
he said recently in an interview before series two, those conversations are happening all the time. He
Hmm.
said he didn't know when or how long, but yes, surely you must have an eye on it. And I think that was everybody's big surprise about series one was it was nearly all him.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
you could also see how that might have happened when you could see those. I think you might have even said this, JR, those two Dr. Light episodes being last minute replacements for other things that got
yeah.
shunted further down into two and three. That you always have scripts in development for your next series. What state they're in, who knows? But I think we can safely assume that there was plans to do more with Susan and other characters who have stories were curtailed for whatever reason. So I wouldn't say it's probably 100% like, but I think the outlines there of what they want to do and some scripts exist. We know they do.
Well, I think he said that first script was ready to start shooting. I mean,
Interesting.
whether it would subsequently get changed anyway if they're introducing a new doctor with it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, presumably it's not start ready to start shooting anymore. But I mean, I'm assuming that they were ready to go to production with Shooty Gatwa on it until the decision for him to leave. Anyway, he carries on. Russell went straight for Billy. She didn't have to audition or anything. It all happened very quickly. I don't even think Russell knows why she has Rosa's face yet, which again goes back to what I was saying. He just got her in.
There's a lot of speculation there, isn't there? There's a
There
lot of
is.
I'm inside people's heads.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think he's right on that point. I think Russell T Davies. Or I think he's partly right. I think Russell T Davies looked at it, said, right, let's get rid of as the Doctor and introducing Billy Piper as the Doctor, which will add an air of mystery to it. At which point he wouldn't have known why he did that. But I don't think Russell T Davies has the kind of brain that says, right, I'll come back to that in 6 months. I think as soon as that happens, he starts to think, well, what
I
could be
think
the reason for it?
he's probably got 4 or 5 ideas.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And, and the chances are he's probably decided on which one or is deciding which one of those works best already. Although that doesn't necessarily mean he won't change his mind further down the line. Most of season 3 was written with Shooty in mind, so don't expect season 16 to be, or the Doctor 16 to be too different. There were a few alternate takes of Billy's first lines. I was hoping for a bit more edge, but it all gave me Jodie vibes. I don't know what he's talking about there, frankly. There's a little bit more. He says,
Oh, she started with that. Oh, brilliant thing. I think that's
yeah, yeah,
the.
yeah. That didn't give me Jodie vibe. I thought it was similar in that there was a sort of comparison about how much it gave away, but I don't think the performance of it was
No.
really all that dissimilar, to be honest. Then he says something about the reshoots for the reality war that caused the sort of latter half of that episode to be changed quite considerably. He says, and we don't know how long the reshoots were going on for. They obviously did this under cover of this documentary that they're making about the 20 years, right?
I believe that the reshoots lasted were basically 2 weeks.
Oh, 2 weeks. So that's
So
fairly
it was quite a
substantial.
considerable amount of stuff because there's that weird moment, isn't it, where 45 minutes in you think everything's wrapping up and then you realise there's another half an hour left of the episode. At least that's how I felt.
Yeah. And then the Doctor wakes up.
But the weird thing is, a lot of that story continues the way it had to anyway. So a lot of that latter half, they're reshooting stuff to reframe it. But I think a lot of the plot ideas had to have been the same ones or similar because
think
it has to have
it's
been about
similar to
Poppy.
the. Yeah, it's like I said on the Reality War review. It's similar to the time of the Doctor where he's wrapping up Matt Smith's or what he was intended to do with Matt Smith
Over a whole
in
season.
20 odd minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
because
compressed
Matt
it.
Smith was supposed to be down for a fourth series and ended up going a year earlier than everyone expected.
Indeed.
For reasons that one day there'll probably be a book about, but not yet. He says also, this is his final paragraph. Oh no, he says everything in unit after the Belinda, Doctor, and Ruby scene, which was also heavily reworked in reshoots, was reshoots, as well as the garden and Belinda's house scene and the stuff with 13, obviously. I mean, I think we could have all seen that, right?
Well, the garden stuff they were seeing on set, weren't they? Like that was the
Yes.
one where there were set report photos of them
Oh,
outside this
really?
house, which made you go, "This is more than just a couple of pickups,"
Yeah,
because
yeah.
usually they could do those in a studio against a green screen or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And also, there was a rumor that came out this week as well that Carol Ann Ford was supposed to be in that garden scene, but watching on from the background, leading into Carol Ann Ford being in series 3 or 16 or whatever you're going to call it.
There was also a rumor that that the final scene, because there's a picture of it, is them in a nightclub. And
Mm,
apparently it was going to be him, the Doctor and his friends all partying away with Carol Ann Ford looking on to be the major plot point of the next season.
right.
I do think it's a dangerous game putting your money on an actor in their 80s 2 years ago to be an important part of the next season. But maybe they filmed everything they needed to with her, and actually there was going to be a regeneration or something, a little bit further down the line. But
And maybe, but also, I think you've got to also imagine that they were expecting to shoot series 3 straight after series 2.
yeah,
And
no,
so
uh,
And so when that got canned, and actually, I think the stuff that we got with Carol Ann Ford anyway kind of works because everybody's thinking it's leading up to something, right? Because we're fans and we imagine it's leading up to something. But in the Interstellar Song Contest, it's all she's calling to him to help him out of a situation. He's floating in space. He
mm,
needs somebody to call
but
him back, like Leia in The Last Jedi, right?
yeah, but she is in a different costume in Confidential, which says she filmed something else, and
Right, right, right.
that's definitely not how she goes down the job center, you know?
Yeah, but what I mean is and then the way it works is the one shot we get of her in Wishworld kind of works as a flashback, sort of memory of what happened before, and we don't actually need more. Although it's fairly clear that there should have been more. And there's been a lot of talk that she was originally in the scene that Jodie Whittaker did.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I could see it working, but I mean, there are only two reasons I can think for them to change it. Number one, she wasn't very good in it. Number two, Russell always wanted to have those two doctors meet in an adventure, and that was going to be part of the next season or something. And since he wasn't going to get the chance, he just threw it in there instead.
Well, on the
It's like
latter point,
it's a reshoot. There's availability as well,
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
possibly.
but
Well,
on the latter,
Carol Ann Ford's very busy.
but or very
Those
old.
big Finnish lunches don't pay for themselves.
But on the latter point, the way that scene works is it's about shooting Atwa's doctor taking a decision to give up his regeneration energy for the baby, which means that the conversation has to be about the regeneration energy, which works better with the doctor.
Hmm.
If that scene had been about him making a decision about the baby that doesn't involve regeneration energy, then that scene works better with his granddaughter than
Yeah,
it does with another doctor.
very
And
true.
so I think it might just have been a
Not,
question of
yeah.
it doesn't work anymore with Carol Ann Ford. Besides, the thing that we filmed with Carol Ann Ford doesn't lead to a
Hmm.
regeneration anyway. So we need to reshoot it anyway. Let's get a doctor in
Hmm.
and do it.
Yeah, makes
I
sense.
could see it both. Yeah, good.
The,
But
the other rumor that I heard that's much earlier was that, I mean, what it was originally Space Baby for a companion. Um, and what I now believe that to be from a few people is similar to Amy Pond, that they would have gone back for Poppy and she would have been the next companion, but she would have been older, obviously. It wouldn't have actually just been a baby on the TARDIS in that respect.
It could have been that the series ends on a cliffhanger where they're looking for the baby, and very much like the River Song situation, they find her as a grown up.
Yeah, exactly.
I could have seen that. I really liked the way the story ended, actually. I thought it was much better. Oh, two things about that, which nobody's mentioned in any of the podcasts I've listened to, and both of which I wrote down on my notes and never got to when we recorded the review. One, Russell T Davies, I'm sure this is a nod of the head to the TV movie. Russell T Davies made Poppy for at least part of that story, half human on her mother's side. Nobody spotted that. Not a single
Very
person.
true.
How was that not spotted? She's half Time Lord and half human on her mother's side. That must be deliberate, I'm sure of it.
Brilliant.
And then the other thing is, she's essentially the timeless child, isn't she? She's kind of
Yeah.
been conjured up out of nowhere. Possibly, so lots of people couldn't work out what this was. I think she's actually physically Poppy, who's been changed back into a normal child by the wish in Wish World.
Yeah.
And then because she comes from outside of planet Earth, she's been kept in Wish World. And so at the end of the Wish World thing, it's like this baby's still alive, this child is still alive, but doesn't default back to what she was before because she's not from here. And so
Yeah.
that's when you get into the story about, well, what do we do about this child?
I did wonder the timeless child thing about 20 minutes before the end of the episode, if that's where it was headed. And if it was
There
a
were
final,
rumours.
yeah, if because people were going, oh, it's a final end, that was one of the rumors going around. And it's like, well, you could close the loop quite easily with a plot line like that. But I'm glad they didn't go there because otherwise it's just, reveals too much. Everybody said the timeless child reveals too much. How the child got there reveals too much.
Yes, exactly. The timeless child creates more mystery, not the other way around.
And I know we're not specifically talking about the episode, but was there a point where they said they're barren that I was thinking looms? I was like, oh my God, they're going to do
Yes.
looms. But it didn't happen.
Again, I'm glad they didn't. And
No, me too.
yeah, and again, I think some people have missed this, but they became barren after the extinction of the Time Lords.
Yeah.
And some people are saying, oh, does that mean that the Master made them deliberately barren? No, it was a side effect of them surviving the thing that killed all the other Time Lords, right? I mean, okay, but so it's not that. And so we'll get into this conversation when we review the series, because I think you're in that anyway, aren't you, Dylan, on Saturday afternoon, I think?
I am
Yeah,
for
yeah.
at least half of it.
So okay. We'll come back to all of this then. He's almost finished. I'll just read his last paragraph very quickly for the sake of completion. He says they're not going to admit that Shooty leaving after 2 seasons wasn't always the plan, because that would mean admitting that season 3 was delayed because season 1 didn't do as well as initially hoped, which Russell will never do. I mean, I don't know. That all of that is just conjecture based on bias, really. And
But
I
it's
think they
all-
will
it-
admit it. I think all of this will come out as soon as they go into production on the next thing. There'll be all these features, and Russell T Davies, I believe, will be very honest about the situation and how it happened, but not till they have the positivity that they can also send out a message and we're back into production on Doctor Who.
Well, they didn't admit for ages about the Eccleston thing, did they? I think you're right. It will come out, but they're going to spin a positive yarn on it
Yeah.
for a good couple of years, I think.
Oh, for sure.
But you don't go, oh, it all went horribly wrong.
But I don't think that they're going to try and disguise the fact that they wanted Shooty for longer and he left earlier than planned.
No.
Because, I mean-
Shooty said it was always the plan.
Did he? I don't think anybody believes
except
that.
on the Graham Norton show.
Yeah, when he said we're shooting season 3 next year.
I think, but I do think 2 really bad decisions were taken at the same time as each other, or not necessarily 2 bad decisions, but because they were taken at the same time as each other, that's kind of caused the chaos that we're currently in. One was the BBC being too eager to get into bed with Disney. So the BBC have not done this with Doctor Who, or probably with many programmes before, certainly not ones that already exist, as opposed to are being created brand new, where they go into bed with a single streamer and all the other contracts that they've had over the years go by the wayside. I think BBC gave Disney too much power over Doctor Who, and I don't think they would have done that if they hadn't have expected things to go better, but a change in management at the top of Disney meant that things didn't go too well. Disney would still have been interested if Doctor Who had been a big success. But I think the other thing, so we know now that Russell T Davies had no idea that the BBC was selling Doctor Who to Disney when he started work on it. Neither did the BBC know what Russell T Davies was going to be doing when they sold Doctor Who to Disney. And then Russell T Davies starts the Disney era with 3 episodes that are not only looking back 15 years to what Doctor Who was in 2008, but also are very continuity heavy, and also are setting a load of stuff up that's going to be important in the Ncuti Gatwa era, which meant that Disney's launch of Doctor Who was flubbed at least twice, if not three times, in the way it happened. And none of it was clean, and none of it was. And this kind of, and I think it would have worked if it hadn't have happened in that way at the same time. But Disney
Yeah.
obviously didn't get quite the program that they were wanting, and the BBC didn't get quite the reaction from Disney that they would have been hoping for. And so the two decisions, totally independent, and neither of which happened in knowledge that the other was happening. I think those two things kind of sank Doctor Who's chances before they even got started, frankly.
I think it's an interesting thing because there's a lot of talk online of like, oh, what do the non-fans think? Da, 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 da. Well, the point is sort of there wasn't really a new audience of non-fans to test that. But also, I think it's important to flag that people like mythos these days. Like, people aren't going into a Marvel film and going, I know who all these characters are. They walk out and go, I wonder who that was. I need to check out what they were in. What it's a very different sort of audience and in a different landscape now. So I don't think we should be worrying about the casual viewer in inverted commas in the same way that
But
we were 20 years ago.
this takes us, after about 50 minutes of talking, into the second half of our conversation, for which we've got about 15 minutes left. So we'll do it fairly briefly, and I think I'll make it more about opinions there. But you're right. If now we're going to talk about Doctor Who as a broadcast program versus Doctor Who as a streaming program, and this has come up so much on podcasts over the last few weeks. Oh, what are people going to make of the Rani who've never heard of the Rani before? Well, they're going to take the fact that in the episode they explain who the Rani
Yeah.
is, and they explain who Omega is, and they're going to, if they want, go back and find out more.
Now, I think that what people are really saying is, I found that exposition clumsy, which is something completely different. I found it clumsy, but that doesn't mean you can't explain it, and they didn't. All the information is there. You do not need anything else. Whether it works as a story or an episode is another thing.
I just go back to two things. One is when Davros turns up as the creator of the Daleks in 1975, you didn't have 6 million 15-year-old kids going, well, I've never heard of him before. Well, that's it. I'm done with Doctor Who. And then the other thing
Or
is...
did you?
Well, and then the other thing is, though, when I was doing the You and Who books, right, do you know the one story that came up time after time after time that was responsible for turning people into fans more than any other story? And I don't know, you could probably survey this and you probably would get this answer that this story is more responsible for people becoming fans. And it's the Five Doctors, which is very backwards looking and filled with things that for which there's not a huge amount of explanation, but that make you go looking for more. I think that's what draws you in.
I think there's a certain kind of subset of fan views which goes that Doctor Who should always be moving forward. It should also be doing something new. And I think that wastes a huge part of the program. A lot of why people are drawn back is the familiar elements. That's part of it. That's part of the safe scares area.
Oh, yes. Not just familiar elements, but also unfamiliar elements for which there is more to find out.
Like the timeless
or
child.
familiar elements in an unfamiliar way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, I agree with you totally there as well, Dylan. Totally.
The Timeless Child was adding a huge amount of mythos to the show in an era where people want mythos. Like that's what they want. They want the things they can find out about, the things they can't. I remember when season 1 broadcast, and several people who'd not watched it before were like, so where do I see the Time War? Where does this happen? It's like, you don't. Right. It just it doesn't happen. But people like that stuff.
Do you know what?
Yeah.
When I
and
got
if you
together,
look at the Timeless Children, it's not necessarily the Timeless Child they have issues with. It's the way it was presented. It's the master basically, as it PowerPointing it.
Yeah,
but you can make that work dramatically. Brilliant.
No, I agree, and that's the same thing we're saying about Omega and the Rani and stuff like that. It's like people's issue is more with the presentation rather and the delivery rather than what they think is will anybody watch this silly program, because they've already turned off by that point, to be truthfully honest. If they didn't like it by episode 1, they're not going to be there on episode 12 or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. And do you know what? When I got together with my partner, she used to watch. She actually doesn't anymore, probably because there's so much choice now because we pay for God knows how many streaming things. But she used to watch a couple of the soaps. And, I would be in the living room eating my dinner when Hollyoaks or Coronation Street was on. And I would say, oh, who's that character? oh, why are they important? What's their relationship to that other character? What's the story that's going on here? And she would tell me what was going on, and I would be, oh, okay. And then you'd be able to follow the story. With the Doctor Who fan, they'll say, oh, I was in the living room with my gran, and she said, who's Omega? Well, that just goes to prove that Russell T Davies is doing his job wrong. No, it doesn't. All it goes to prove is that she's not seen Doctor Who before and she wants to catch up.
Yeah.
Or else she doesn't want to catch up and she's not interested. But in that case, she's not going to be watching Doctor Who anyway, right?
How many
Or
people?
she's interested in your show.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
How many people tuned into the 40th anniversary of EastEnders with all these legacy characters and different styles of storytelling and things like that to a show that they haven't watched for 15 years? You know, to sort of invest in the mythos. They came back for the past, not necessarily to carry on watching it in the future.
But and look, we're going to be at
time and time again with soaps and other stories. That's the big draw. It's the same principle as actors in Hollywood. You know, it's Tom Cruise. He could open a film by himself because they want to see him. He's familiar.
Well, then it's like in the Mission Impossible films, in the latest Mission Impossible, I've not seen it yet, and so I'm just going off half-remembered thing that I read on Wiki. But aren't two characters, or at least one character from the first Mission Impossible film, back in the latest, having not done any of the films in between? And didn't Michelle Collins come back to EastEnders after 10 years out of the programme, right? And didn't... I mean, this happens in soaps all the time, doesn't it?
Leslie Grantham did.
Yeah, Leslie Grantham did. And it's a big thing when they come... Billy Piper coming back to Doctor Who is just exactly the same as that. We've got 10 minutes left and we've not even really got to this question. I think if there is a problem with Doctor Who, it's that it sits between being a streaming programme, and I'm not even just talking about Disney, but iPlayer, and being a broadcast programme, because television has kind of split into these two different things now. Broadcast television kind of needs to work for an audience that is just kind of half watching, not watching, has it on while they're eating dinner, while they're doing the ironing, while whatever, or sticks television on when the kids are in the room and needs something safe that they can be playing while the kids are playing, or whatever. Streaming is something that you invest your money, your time, and your interest in. And so Doctor Who kind of has to have storylines that will engage people and keep them with the programme in the way that Stranger Things does. But at the same time, it still has to play, even with overnight audiences of 1.5, right? 1.5 million. Everybody, by the way, who's pre-transmission or post-transmission of that audience is part of essentially the streaming crowd because they're iPlayering it. That's streaming, not broadcast.
That's also your core audience.
It is now,
those are the people that are seeking it out. Of those 1.5, I don't know the exact stats, but some of them will just be people who have got the telly on, as you say, and they might not watch it the next week, but there'll be somebody else sat in their house doing the same thing.
And the audiences now, I think the overnights are about 1.5 against a plus 28 figure of maybe 3.5 or 4, right? So the overnight is less than half of the audience, and the overnight includes people who catch up later in the evening. The actual live audience is probably 1 million people out of an audience of 4 million people. It's a quarter of the audience. So the broadcast audience is about a quarter of the audience, let's say, for Doctor Who, which does not mean that the BBC and Bad Wolf, Russell T Davies, whoever's producing and writing Doctor Who, can ignore 25% of the audience.
Yeah.
But I think Doctor Who's trapped in a place. I think Russell T Davies is trapped in a place where they're trying to do it kind of 50-50.
But it's always been that way, I think. This is something I wrote.
But that's what I mean, John.
In the Rose Black Archive. It needs
to stop being that way and make a decision.
I don't think it does. I don't think it does because that's how it's always been. It's how you see it in kind of American fan view versus British. You know, we're used to it being there on Saturday evening as part of an entertainment lineup, or Sunday evening, whatever, or midweek in case of the 80s. They find that series. They think of it as science fiction series. They don't see that kind of entertainment heritage. And I think that's what Doctor Who's great strength is compared to Star Trek. Star Trek cannot hook that kind of wider audience because it's explicitly seen as a sci-fi series. It's not an entertainment thing anymore. It's something that is a streaming show. I think
But
Doctor Who has to have that entertainment thing. The
oh, it
Saturday
does.
nightness, I think it was called,
But
in its DNA.
my point, John, is if 3/4 and more of your audience is not the light entertainment audience, but is the streaming audience, I think you need to lean more in their direction.
And
Something like
But
Flux.
are you taking it away from a mass audience at that,
no,
No, I don't think Flux did.
no.
or going
But
towards fan?
but we've already said that the mass audience isn't there anymore because it's only 25% of the
In relative
audience.
terms, yeah.
Like, I think had they gone for something like Flux for the Disney era, I'm not saying it would have been a huge success, but I think there's a world where it suddenly embeds itself as a streaming show and can build an audience on a streamer rather than this. Like, there is no reason after Space Babies to tune back into that program if you didn't like the tone
Well,
of that.
that was going to be my point. It
And,
becomes disposable.
Fair, fair.
You can stop. And the point with things like Stranger Things is if you watch the first episode, even if you didn't particularly enjoy it, it leaves you on such a hook. You come back next week anyway, and you build your audience because of all these people who think, well, it's okay. By week 3, they're absolutely hooked. And by week 6, they're like, oh, it's the best thing ever. Why did I think it was just okay? The trouble with
That's
Doctor Who
something
is...
like Flux, I think it does solve to a certain extent the problem of Doctor Who's format, which is designed for an era of TV divided from theatrical. It's a mad program. You have to do basically a different set, a different world every single week. I think we've said it on our chats. It's a nightmare.
I think people get this wrong though. Doctor Who is not an anthology show. It was a serial show to start with, where for 4 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, 6 weeks, you would have an ongoing story, and then it would change.
Yeah.
And I think what quite rightly in when they brought the show back, they went, well, okay, well, we need to make that for a modern era. I think you've got to look at that format again and make it for a modern era and go, actually, maybe we just need to tell one story over 6 episodes. And that doesn't mean one story in one place. I mean, we spend half the last series in fucking rooms anyway, so it's not like the series is going anywhere and everywhere in time and space. It's largely going to someone's flat or a large room somewhere. So it's, I just think I'm going back to the core of the show and going, this is how it used to be.
Yeah.
Perhaps we need to pull something else from it, but it was not in 1963 or in 1989 an anthology show. It was
People did not come back in 1963-64 because they're thinking, oh, Marco Polo next week, can't wait to see that. Oh, Censor Rights the week after, can't wait to see that. They came back in 1963 because they wanted to know what the fuck it was that was making Barbara scream so badly.
Yeah, it's a halfway house between that and the minute, because obviously with the art plot, it's more heavily linked than it was first time round.
But I think Russell T Davies, I think the problem in the last couple of years, after Flux, we had Flux, and then you go to a streamer, and Flux is perfect for a streamer, but what Russell T Davies has done is given you a first episode 3 times in a row, a first 4 times in a row. I suppose you can count the Star Beast, I suppose you can count Church on Ruby Road, you can count the Space Babies, and you can count Robot Revolution. 4 times in a row he's given you a first episode where you go, that was nice, but there's no cliffhanger into next week.
And you're looking for
most of it, his first as well.
Yeah.
Yes, but now, John, he's on Disney. The first time around he wasn't. Now he's on Disney. Now he needs to make,
which is huge in.
But he needs to make Doctor Who that works for Disney as well. And I think he's just making Doctor Who that works on BBC One. I don't think enough thought about the streamer has gone into this. And again, it goes back to that decision where Russell T Davies was on board separately to Disney. And I don't think Disney factored enough in Russell T Davies's thinking.
And it's a fascinating conversation with whatever Russell is watching these days. I'd love to know.
Yeah, because
apart from Heartstopper, he's watching Heartstopper.
It feels like he obviously went after that YA audience because there were less young people watching television, and
he did a good job of that. I think. I think the stories have revolved around that in quite a good way. But
again, why are you coming? Like, if you see this trailer and you go, "Oh, it's all this exciting stuff," and then you've got this episode on a spaceship with some talking babies as one point, or an episode set in this robot revolution. I don't know. I've not seen it, and it's like if either of those are your first one and you are not immediately drawn to that thing and there's nothing to keep you going through, then and you're not finding these characters that compelling, then why are you sticking about? If there's a big fuck off cliffhanger into the next story, not just some snow in a TARDIS, you suddenly
Yeah.
go, okay, this is an ongoing story. I need to find out more about these people. He's what he's done is unfortunately taken something that worked on terrestrial television 20 years ago and tried to replicate it for streaming, and the streaming audience have gone, this is not for us.
Who is Susan Twist? Was a question we were all asking ourselves after we'd already seen half the season. It's not the question that we came out of the first episode going, I need to know the answer to this. He I think he's done a lot of things really well, and I think a lot of this has worked, but I just don't think he's had the streaming audience enough in mind to draw them in a way that Flux would have, I think. And then Flux wasn't made for a streaming audience in the way that this should have been. So even Flux would have had to be tweaked, I think,
Mm.
to work better for a Disney crowd. But look at Stranger Things. That's not in the same place each week. Each of the
No.
episodes of Stranger Things is pretty distinct. And you can do that in Doctor Who with the TARDIS, but you need to construct your story like Flux did
Mm.
around how you make that work across time and space. And the whole point of having the TARDIS is it does work across time and space. That's kind of the point of it. So you should be thinking about those things. And I don't think Doctor Who does enough.
It's a reason why all those failed aborted Doctor Who films from the 90s were all quests. Because in 90 minutes on a cinema screen, how do you tell one story but also capture the show? You go on a quest throughout all of time and space, and you spend 10 minutes. They're all the chase, essentially. You spend
Yeah,
10
yeah.
minutes in history, 10 minutes in the future, 10 minutes on Gallifrey, and you show it all, because that's how you capture it. As I said, yeah, I mean, we're sort of repeating ourselves, but a singular sort of story slash arc doesn't mean a singular location, or it shouldn't.
So I think so we have run out of time. So we probably carry on with this conversation at some point in the future, but I think we've got our main points out. I think it just needs to lean slightly more towards the serial, really, for me.
Yeah.
It has to give people a reason to come back week after week. More than, oh, it's on at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night. That's a handy time to be sitting down watching telly.
Yeah.
Right. We'll be back on Saturday to do our season retrospective, and Dylan will be around for the second half of that, and he'll just be sitting there in silence for the first half, I'm sure. Until then, I was JR,
I was Dylan.
And I was John.
and we will speak again soon.